Hi, I'm James and welcome to another review. Today we're going to look at Revell's Modern British Infantry in 20mm. Now this was released in 1998, so it was this sort of kit that was around at that time. Now they're really usable from about 1985 onwards, although at that point you would have to paint the webbing olive green because that was the initial issue before it went into DPM. Now it's a nice bit of box art. I would just give a little bit of a warning that the colours of one or two of the figures on the box art look a bit like the older 65 pattern rather than the 95 pattern, which is what the figures are actually wearing. Also, the LSW gunner on the cover is going to get some very sore fingers when the cocking handle comes back and manages to hit them. It's an appropriate hold for earlier weapons and for the GPMG, but it's much less appropriate for the LSW. This is why there's the rear grip. You can hold it that way, but you'd have to have the hand slightly further to the rear. Looking at the sprues, you can see that there are 48 figures with 56 parts between them. The only multi-part figure is the GPMG team, which consists of 5 parts. You have a base, you have the gunner, you have the tripod, you have the weapon itself, and you have an ammunition box. The figures, depending on which age of box you buy, the earlier version, which had a different box art, much more line art than more photographic style, they were tan figures. The ones here, as you can see, are a very, very dark green, almost black. That's the later version. Now they're usable in a variety of conflicts. Operation Granby, the Gulf War, is the obvious one there. They can also be used for peacekeeping operations, particularly in the Balkans, and they can also be used for early Iraq and Afghanistan. You can actually see my video. I'll put a link up in the top corner to assembling a British force. It's aimed at 15mm, but it covers 20mm just as well. If you are painting them up for desert, then you could paint them in desert DPM without any major issue. That would be a 2-colour one, a very light tan colour and a slightly darker patched colour. Webbing would usually still be either the olive green in the early period or the standard DPM rather than desert DPM outside of that. So let's start looking at the individual figures. We've got this figure on patrol, carrying the rifle across the body. I quite like the pose. It's nice and realistic. It looks good. Like all of the figures, it's wearing PLC webbing, and in this case has got a day sack. It was quite common for a green day sack to be worn with DPM webbing, as I've painted up here. The second figure is also carrying a rifle, firing. It's lovely positioning with that. The leaning slightly into the firing position is entirely correct, and like all of the figures, it's equipped with a SUSAT on the rifle, which is Sight Unit Small Arms Trilux, which is a ×4 scope. So that would give these figures as infantry rather than support troops. The third rifle armed figure is the only one with a bayonet. I'm not quite sure why they've done that. I would have rather them all with or all without. He's also carrying an ammunition box, which is quite a nice touch. For those painting it up, you can't see it in here, but it would be brown with yellow writing on and an orange diamond. That would only be on one side. So if you're painting them up, that's how they would look. The fourth rifle figure has got a slung SA-80, but is also carrying an extended low AT anti-tank weapon. Now, like all the rest of the figures, there's no body armour, although it could be a case of wearing the improved Northern Ireland body armour, the Aniba, under the jacket as it was worn, and they're also wearing the standard Mark 6 helmet. The last rifle figure has also got an SA-80 and a low AT. Now in this case the low AT hasn't yet been extended and has actually got the 2 caps over the end of it. Moving on to the LSW, the light support weapon. This was the heavier version of the rifle. The first figure is prone. Now, LSWs were issued on a scale of 1/4 to provide fire support. It's entirely realistic, however, not to have all your fire teams with them. The Staffords in the First Gulf War, for example, often left behind the LSW on the vehicles and took the driver's SA-80, so you could often have a fire team with 4. Again, if you look at the link for British Fire Team organisation within the series on British Army equipment, you'll see how that's done. The second LSW is running. Now this one's got the double rocket packs, as the Daysacks were known, but it does have a really odd hand position. It's the only one I've really got an issue with any of the pausing, in that the right hand isn't on the pistol grip, it's actually on the rear grip, which is a very, very unusual pause. I've never actually seen anybody carry an LSW like that. Moving on to the support type figures, we've got a 51mm mortar. Now, this replaced the 2-inch mortar of World War II fame. It was issued on a scale of 1 per platoon. Had a dedicated gunner, but quite frequently during manpower shortages that were common during this period, the platoon sergeant would carry it. It's predominantly used for illumination and smoke rather than HE. So, useful little thing to have. It's something that's often missed out when you look at figure packs, so I quite like that one. We then get the first figure with a radio. Now they're carrying a UK PRC 351 backpack radio. One of these was issued to each platoon, and then they were also used at company level. It was a dated design going back, I believe, to the 1960s. Did have a couple of nice features, such as the ability to rig 2 together as a field telephone or a rebroadcasting system, and it had the ability to plug 2 handsets into it, or more usually one handset which would be picked up used by the platoon commander, and a second one which was usually the earpiece and a throat mic. That was what was usually carried. The second radio operators carrying the UK PRC 349. Now this was, rather than being worn as a backpack, was worn in the carrying case on the chest, as you can see here. Occasionally it was fitted in a pouch instead. The radio was usually issued at section and platoon level, usually to the section commanders. Now this is one of the few figures where there's a little bit of flash on them. I found that one of the antennas was a bit untidy, so you can see here I've actually done one with a long 1 meter whip antenna, and the one with the flash I actually cut down to a 50 centimeter short whip antenna, so that just helped with that. The next figure is a sniper armed with the L96, which replaced the L42. They frequently wore a full ghillie suit, or in this case a partial one, and I've added to some of the camo there with some static grass just to blend it in a bit better. Now this is the only figure who's not wearing a helmet, but instead either a bush hat or a field cap. It's hard to tell. All you can see is the peak at the front, which could have come from either. One of the 3 of these does tend to have a bit of flash on. I've noticed that in both the early ones I bought and the late ones, so it does look like it's a moulding issue, but considering you probably won't need 3 snipers, that's not exactly a problem. Next we've got the last figure, which is the GPMG. Now this was replaced as a section weapon, but remained in use in the SF, which stood for Sustained Fire Roll, on a tripod at company level, and there are 2 of these. Yes, it is a bit fiddly to fit together, but it does produce a nice result. So that's all of the individual figures. Looking at the platoon, you can make, if you assemble it at 1-to-1, a full platoon with some support weapons, with a few figures left over just from one box. It's one of the few times I've ever come across a box that's given a really good organisation within it, so 10 out of 10 to Revell for that. If instead you do it as I've done it here, with 2 per stand to represent a fire team, so you're looking at about a 50-50 portrayal here, you've got easily enough for 2 platoons. Only thing you'd miss is you don't really have enough LSWs to have 1 on each stand, but that isn't a problem. I've tended to put them so I've got 1 LSW per 4 figures, so it's the correct ratio done that way. Overall, it's an excellent box of figures. It's a well thought out set of contents. There's 1 or 2 little anomalies, like the strange paws of the LSW gunner who's running, but kit wise they're bang on, and you'd be hard pressed to spot the difficulties once the figures are painted and on the table. They're just a bit of a pain to paint because DPM is never the easiest thing to paint. I have got a guide to painting it in 15mm, and again I'll put a link up in the top. Hopefully you found that useful, and I'll see you soon for another review.